Icons in cyberspace. In 1990 or 91, I think, in my high school, they offered their first computer graphics course. I was an honors art student, and so I got in. There was only a few computers in this class. We couldn't even have our own computers. We had to sort of trade off. And maybe one day you sit there sketching while your partner's using the computer, and then next day you trade off. Something like that, you know. But we used a rudimentary version of Paint, what you all have, I think, in your device. We were taught how to use a mouse, you know, to move the arrow. Not everybody had a computer by that point. And use the virtual desktop, or use your arrow across the virtual desktop to click on an icon, for example, to open Adobe Paint, to link to it. Think about that. Icons on your desktop that you click on. You might have a Mary on your real desktop, or a Ganesha statue, some sort of icon on your real desktop. And we use these things to link, these icons, to link what they represent, to some extent. Some people may literally sit in a church and meditate on an icon of Mary until they have some sort of mystical connection. They link, you know, to her in some way. Or it could be, you know, a certain image of a certain aspect of the Buddha. Something like that, whatever. Or it could be, to some extent, you are a child that you're so into, I don't know, a Indiana Jones movie so much that you sort of see Indiana Jones, the character, as an icon of adventurism and manliness, and so you sort of, I don't know, link to that. So there's, you know, cultural icons.
Yeah, we identify with them. That's why we continue to make them.
Right. But it's funny how the people who came up with the names for these things, for computers, they often seem to be very prescient, and I'm assuming that they knew what they were doing when they named these things avatars, icons, etc. These are religious, mystical terms. But they're appropriate nonetheless. Icons on our devices link, wink, us to something transcendent. In the sense of virtually existing in cyberspace, we click on icons to pilot, let me footnote that, us from where we are into, by the way, pilot. The prefix cyber means pilot in the sense of piloting your boat, or being a steersman of your boat, or, you know, your spaceship these days or whatever, you know, or your airplane. That's what cyber means. Cooper, pilot. So we use icons in a sense of virtually existing in cyberspace. We click on icons to pilot us from where we are into what we want to access, just like religious icons are designed to do in a mystical sense. Mandalas and yantras are also instruments, quote unquote, intended to open a window, wink wink, allowing us to steer, wink wink, into sacred space. Now, notice here, Windows icon. There you go. It's a window. Think of that as an opening into something else, just like an icon leads you into something else, an opening into another dimension, say. Another space.
Yeah.
Cyberspace, opening a program up, whatever the case may be. One might have an icon on their virtual desktop that looks like a 2D representation, for example, of a certain yantra like this one right here. That's the Tripura Sundari. It's a yantra. More about that if we want to click on that. But Iconoclasm through history. The destruction of icons is probably only slightly older than the creation of icons. Quote, history is full of examples of iconoclasm, unquote, writes Lucinda Dervin, who teaches ancient history at the University of Amsterdam. Footnote number 9, which is that there. In the book Isms and Ologies, which is on my shelf, so sorry, no link for that, on page 237, Arthur Goldwag writes, quote, the biblical patriarch Abraham was literally an iconoclast when, as legend tells us, he destroyed the idols his father had carved, unquote. Now, the context there is that I think Abraham is considered to be the first monotheist, at least in the sense of the Judeo-Islamic Christian tradition. He's the father of all three of those. Muhammad, too, was an iconoclast. Durbin writes that, quote, "The theological reasoning of this iconoclasm is the second commandment. God tells Moses to write the following down. You shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of what is in heaven above or on the earth beneath or in the water under the earth." And that's Exodus 24. The making of statues is forbidden because people may fall into idol worship, which happened when the Israelites made a golden calf in the Sinai desert. And that's, you can find that in Exodus 32, 1 through 33, about the whole golden calf thing there.
Yeah, and then Moses destroys the tablets.
Yeah,
Which is,
and he's got to go back.
Isn't that exactly what you're talking about?
Yeah, well, that's what happens.
Smashes them because he's angry.
Yeah, but that's not the act of iconoclasm. The act of iconoclasm there would, well, I mean, that's fair to say. I mean, I guess it is iconic. The actual tablets are iconic, and it's not,
Carved by the hand of another.
Right.
Or
but I think
the
what the author,
hand of another.
I think what the author here, however, is saying is that, they have to destroy the calf now.
Yeah, and the calf is pulled apart.
Of course, in Muhammad, he followed the patriarchs of the Jews right up to Jesus, and he stopped before that. So the Ten Commandments apply. And they have their own version of that. I have it on my shelf, but I just don't know where in the Quran to find where they reference that. But there you go. And that's, again, why you see in a lot of Islam, especially in ancient times, there are no artistic representations not only of Allah, but also of anything natural or anything made by man or by Allah. So, like, you can't make a picture of, like a sword or a bird in a lot of ancient Islam or in some sects of Islam today. No visual representations of things, but designs are fine, which is why a lot of them emphasize a lot of calligraphy and a lot of intricate designs, as you may have noticed in their art. So they go on to write, the commandments of Moses are written in the Bible and in the Quran. This explains why, from time to time, iconoclasm reemerges in Judaism, Christianity, and in Islam. In some periods, the ban is extended to imagery of all living creatures, but it mostly concerns representations of deities. But not all religious groups exercise the same strictness when it comes to making statues of gods. Sometimes it is allowed to make representations of gods if they are not worshipped. Occasionally, a group holds a literal interpretation of holy scriptures and rejects depictions of divine beings altogether. For example, at the end of the 4th century CE, that's the same thing as AD, Common Era, or AD, Anno Domini, when Christianity became the sole official religion in the Roman Empire, fanatic Christians, I think they mean fanatical Christians, destroyed many non-Christian sanctuaries. And during the 8th and 9th centuries, Christian advocates and opponents of religious imagery twice battled against each other in the Byzantine Empire. As a result, almost all art from the early years of Christianity was destroyed in the East. Large-scale destruction of statues also occurred in later centuries. In Northern Europe, followers of John Calvin destroyed countless Catholic statues during the iconoclastic movement of 1566. Now, this is the one that most of us think of when we think of the word, the way the actual term iconoclasm applies to iconoclasm anywhere in any culture at any time. But we tend to associate it with this time period of the Calvinists doing this, the Puritans doing this, the Protestants doing this. The source goes on to say, they argued that these statues were remnants of heathen beliefs that were at odds with Christianity. And here we see an artistic representation of the golden calf. You see that, Tabby? This is Nicholas Poussin, if I'm saying his name correctly. I'm probably not. The adoration of the golden calf. And there's Moses pointing up to God and also going, "What is this?" with the calf, with this other hand.
What is this stuff here?
Yeah. And here you can see some people basically still trying to dance around this idol that they have created for themselves, or this icon that
This thing.
Moses is about to destroy and force feed them.
Yay!
Now here's a painting by Delen, I suppose you would say, a Dutch artist, Dirk van Delen.
LA.
1600s iconoclasts in a church, and you could see people climbing up a ladder and trying to attach rope to it and destroy things here or there, and other people doing, so check it out. This statue has been destroyed already, and it's a horrible scene. And this artist is depicting that horror, that destruction. Here is a, I think it's a illuminated manuscript page here, right? Notice this, folks. This looks like this is the, Jesus up on the cross and how they gave him a sponge. It's supposed to be meant for giving the some wine or water mixed for the person up on the crucifix. Notice it's a sponge on a stick that you can read about in the Bible. And here you have the pot for the drink. Then down here, you have a pot for the whitewash, for the paint, the white paint. And this guy is using a sponge on a stick to what? To whitewash over Jesus. This is what I meant earlier, but when I said whitewashing, but not in the sense that we typically use that term today. They literally, these iconoclasts, these Antifas of their day, would go into churches with pots of whitewash, of white paint, sponges on long sticks so that they can whitewash over pictures of Jesus and Mary up on the high church ceilings and walls and whatnot. And this person here is somebody who's against that, showing that, look, they won't, these artists oftentimes won't show the iconoclast actually having destroyed anything, but about to.
Yeah.
So they don't like that. And this artist here is comparing the treatment of Jesus up on the cross with the treatment of icons of Jesus by the iconoclasts. And so if you want to read more about that, you can go to the source. But this is me now, so unquote. In the Byzantine Empire, at least, iconoclastic cancel culture may have been enacted by the government under pressure applied by the woke to appease minorities. According to OER, quote, open hostility towards religious representations began in 726 AD, or Common Era, when Emperor Leo III publicly took a position against icons. This resulted in their removal from churches and their destruction. There have been many previous theological disputes over visual representations, their theological foundations and legitimacy. However, none of these caused the tremendous social, political, and cultural upheaval of the iconoclastic controversy. Oh yeah? Well, how about this? I lost that one now. I lost that one, man. Totally lost that one. Alright. They continue, though. Some historians believe that by prohibiting icons, the emperor sought to integrate Muslims and Jewish populations. Both Muslims and Jews, at least at that time, perceived Christian images that existed from the earliest times of Christianity as idols and in direct opposition of the Old Testament prohibition of visual representations, unquote. In Gallery Glance, Striking Power, Iconoclasm in Ancient Egypt, at Pulitzer Arts Foundation, March 19, 2019, Alison Thorson writes of a, quote, provocative exhibit, unquote, with, quote, 40 masterworks of ancient Egyptian art, unquote, that were, quote, conceived to stimulate thought on the power of monuments and what drives their destruction, unquote, and that, quote, demonstrates how seemingly random acts of destruction and defacement were deliberate actions intended to undermine the strength of objects viewed as vehicles of powerful spiritual energy, unquote. She writes that one of the co-curators said that the exhibit offers, quote, a window, unquote, pun not intended on their part, I don't think, through which to view these defaced icons, quote, as instruments of political and cultural power, unquote. The term itself is closely associated with this destructive human impulse. That is iconoclasm, I think I meant here. I'm sorry, I wrote this about a month ago. The term itself is closely associated with this destructive human impulse as it reared its ugly head in the Byzantine world. So I am referring to iconoclasm here. In a period not unlike our own, insofar as there was public debate over and demand for destruction of icons by activists and by law. And here's footnote number 10 to back that up there. Alright? Check that out if you want to. Quote, in the Byzantine world, iconoclasm refers to a theological debate involving both the Byzantine church and state. The controversy spanned roughly a century during the years 726 to 787 and 815 to 843. In these decades, imperial legislation barred the production and use of figural images. Simultaneously, the cross was promoted as the most acceptable decorative form for Byzantine churches, unquote. Now, it's kind of funny. A cross is not just an abstract geometrical figure. It represents a physical object, the object upon which Christ was crucified. Mm-hmm. I mean, you could say it's not an icon in the strict sense. Yeah. Yeah.
It's usually the case.
Right.
I want it, but I can't have it. Let's loophole! Like, well, if you're looking for a loophole, then you're looking for a sin. Yeah. Sorry, according to your religion, it counts.
Yep. Now, this whole debate over iconoclasm and iconophiles, shall we say, or at least people that respect history and art and all that, at that time, in these years, this is that period back then is sometimes referred to as the Iconic Controversy, which is described as, quote, a dispute over the use of religious images, icons, in the Byzantine Empire in the 8th and 9th centuries. The iconoclasts who rejected images objected to icon veneration for several reasons, including the Old Testament, as we saw earlier, prohibition against the images in the Ten Commandments, Exodus 24, and the possibility of idolatry. The defenders of the use of icons insisted on the symbolic nature of images and on the dignity of created matter. And let me hover over the footnote for us, unquote. Encyclopedia Britannica there. Sadly, quote, very few early Byzantine icons survived the iconoclastic period. All right, and that's according to something by the Met. In other words, they had a sort of cultural revolution themselves, in which some of their own icons were, using the terminology from Orwell's 1984, they were sent down the memory hole, replaced, and thereby rectified. And here's another horrible case of iconoclasm right there. Look at that. And you can see more about that if you click on there. In many cases, icons were quote-unquote plastered over. And let me hover over the footnote. Or quote-unquote overpainted with a mix of water and powdered chalk or powdered lime. In other words, whitewash. They were literally quote-unquote whitewashed. I remember a lesson in Iconoclasm in Art History 1 in college not too long ago, because I went back to college as an adult after some stuff happened. Wherein we looked at a slide of a depiction of an iconoclast using a mop head, or maybe it was a sponge, on an especially long pole to reach and to whitewash an icon painted high up on a wall. So sort of like what you see right there. There are indeed historical depictions of iconoclasts in action with the pot of whitewash, right? Or the mop, or a giant paintbrush, or sponges on a stick. So that's when I'm using the term whitewash. I'm using that term to reference that cleverly, okay? When I mean that they whitewash over black faces of black, say, commercial icons. You know, like Aunt Jemima, for example, Uncle Ben of Uncle Ben's Rice, and the buckwheat box guy, cream of wheat, sorry, chef guy, etc. and so on. And so you could click on there. Here's another example of the whitewash pot, and they're about to do Jesus right there. Actually, I think that's a detail from what we saw above, but here's a different one. This guy seems to have a turban, so I wonder if he's supposed to represent... maybe not. No, okay, maybe that's not. It's just hard to tell. It's such an old and destroyed image. But anyway, there you go. Here's another detail. And that's from a Psalter, by the way. I think I said illuminated manuscript to be more accurate, a Psalter. Here's another example. There's a whitewash pot. And here you could say, I just noticed this in Greek, ikono. Ikono, however you say that, but it's referring to the icon there.